tribute given to Father Francis Vineeth. 3 days spent together to reflect about his life and contributions, I'm sure will make an impact also in our minds. Soon after he expired, we gave him a tribute in the form of a memoirs that was published on his 41st Memorial Day, in which we had almost 80 entries, and a good number of you had already represented your feedbacks or responses on the life of Father Vineeth. And the second tribute given to Father Francis Vineeth was the creation of the website, vineethcmi.in, which already has almost 100,000 hits, which I'm really proud of. And on this website, we have tried to provide all the resources available. The available publications and manuscripts have been already put over there, and anybody who is interested could make use of this, vineethcmi.in. And this is a third tribute, the 3 days conference in which we all come together, study his person and contributions. I thank Father Thomas for the very generous introduction that he has already given to me. I'm really happy and proud of coming back always to DVK. This is my alma mater, literally, who made me what I am today. And as I speak to you today, I'm just trying to focus myself on the two aspects of presenting Father Vineeth as a pilgrim and a prophet of hope and peace. Now, because the paper is a little bit lengthy, let me just try to read out without much of my interventions in between. Introduction. Let me begin with the concluding remark in my introductory article on Father Francis Vineeth, which was published in the Festschrift presented to him in 2009, in which I had quoted his own statement on an authentic person from his book, Foundations of World Vision. Such a man we call simple. He lacks duplicity. In him, there is perfect synthesis of the internal and external, of thoughts and expressions. Such a man is loved by all because he reflects the divine. The integration or samanvayam that Father Francis Vineeth had attained made him simple and authentic, reflecting the divine, and it was perceived by those who closely associated with him during his lifetime. In fact, yesterday's reflections, starting with Archbishop of Pondicherry and the keynote of Peter Tyler, all of us have been dwelling on these dimensions of Father Vineeth's life. Being in the year of Jubilee 2025, I propose to begin my revisiting of Father Francis Vineeth by superimposing an external structure upon his person and thoughts. In my effort to unravel his simple and authentic life, I try to introduce a pattern or structure from a brief but 2-page communication from the Dicastery for Consecrated Life, taking cue from the teachings of Pope Francis and addressed to the major superiors of religious congregations and various forms of consecrated life. This letter, in my reading, frames the life of consecration as an ongoing pilgrimage, aiming at hope with its roots and fruits, as proposed for review and practice during this year of Jubilee of Consecration. The roots are constituted by, number 1, anchoring, and number 2, pilgrimage. And the fruits consist of 1, care for the poor and the marginalized, 2, care and protection of nature, and 3, care for humanity and fraternity. These aspects, considered to be essential to Christian consecration, I believe also did shape Father Francis Vineeth into a consecrated pilgrim and a prophet of hope and peace. So let me now start with the first part on the roots. Solid anchoring in the Lord. An oft repeated statement of Father Francis Vineeth in his lectures and meditation was, "You become what you meditate." And in fact, the statement was given to us based on Mundaka Upanishad. In his quest to become an authentic disciple of Jesus Christ, Father Francis Vineeth carefully and earnestly engaged himself in a relentless process of appropriating the person of Jesus Christ by way of his meditative and contemplative prayer and being. He captured the goal by claiming that knowing is becoming and becoming is realizing, with its solid and absolute foundation in the person of Jesus Christ. Later, in no uncertain terms, Father Francis Vineeth asserted about the final outcome of this process of Christian becoming. When we realize Christ in us, we become another Christ, Arte Christus. As a philosopher theologian, backed up with his credible research and compelling experience and expertise, as a teacher and spiritual guide, he insisted that sanctity is never the academic knowledge of truth, but the actual realization of truth in one's own life. Thus, it is very obvious, both from his personal life of Father Francis Vineeth and from his extensive writings, that he drew the lifeblood of his very existence from the person of Jesus Christ, and it shaped his thought and action. The clarity with which his life's anchor was unequivocally maintained is easily grasped from his lectures, writings, meditations, etc. For example, in commenting on Gayatri Mantra as part of a meditation, he wrote, "A Christian may even look at this mantra as a Trinitarian hymn. The great, adorable Son is the source of all light and thus points to the Father. His divine splendor has been revealed to us through Jesus Christ and is now made accessible through meditation. The goal, however, is that His Spirit may illumine my mind, that I become a living ray of that divine light in this world, which needs constant transformation into the divine. Naturally then, a person anchored in Christ adopts a vision that is akin to that of Christ and a life perspective that is animated by a new vision that originates from the gospel. Once the absolute being is revealed to us in Jesus Christ, then Christ and his teachings become very central to our life. It controls our vision and characterizes our thinking. Those who believe in Christ now have a new vision, a theological vision or a Christian vision. Christian theology, properly understood, is a way of looking at everything enlightened by this new vision. This anchoring in the divine includes a dynamic and transformative process that envelops the whole person and initiates a metamorphosis within oneself. True to his focus on Christic identity, Father Francis Vineeth asserted, faith in Jesus, as far as good Christian is concerned, is not merely rational, dogmatic assertion, but an existential grafting into an all-pervading reality in which experience becomes very much central to that person. Christ as a living person who enters into his or her life and abides in the depth of his or her heart through his Spirit, transforms him or her, changing his vision, values, and lifestyle. So much so that now he could say, it is no longer that I who live, but Christ who lives in me. This is found to be literally captured by Father Francis Vineeth in his effort to symbolize the divine incarnation of Jesus Christ on a glass panel placed on the backdrop of the sanctuary at Vidya Chapel. Following the description of Kathopanishad about Urdhmoolam, Jesus' incarnation is depicted in the form of a tree with the roots above and the branches below, and the tree being a combination of banyan tree and neem tree, as if they are grafted together to form a single tree, symbolizing divinity and humanity respectively, both of which are united into one tree by the work of the Holy Spirit. Father Francis Vineeth understood and interpreted this tree as Jesus Christ, who comes down from heaven to establish us in truth, bless us with the divine life, and show us the way to heaven. This Indian symbolic interpretation of divine incarnation of Jesus Christ using the description of Urdhvamulam, to my mind, is the most sublime and impactful theological articulation of the anchoring that Father Francis Vineeth had realized in his life. And I hope in the course of time, and hopefully, Father Babu, we could include at least a study on this artwork as the backdrop of Vidya Ashram Chapel, which would be really meaningful and would also provide us a comprehensive theological vision of Father Francis Vineeth. In fact, the focus with which Father Francis Vineeth conducted all his endeavors ensured that the synthesis that he was aiming at between the Christian and the Indian, the Oriental and Western, philosophy and theology, all climaxed for him in his realization of the divine in Jesus Christ. As he had perceived it, what is salutary in the Indian approach to wisdom is that it unconditionally demands the eradication of ego, the ahankara, originating from the false identification of the human with the divine, which is the avidya. The true wisdom, on the contrary, is the wisdom of faith, which perceives the divine spirit in the inner man and allows him to be strengthened by it, and ultimately becomes the real and the all-pervading agent in him as the vine and its branches. I just skip the next small paragraph. Anchoring in the divine, Father Francis Vineeth knew, will lead to union with God and communion with fellow beings. The ultimate goal of getting anchored in the Lord could be made visible in the efforts made by a religious person in the form of communion that he or she cherishes and facilitates. So every one of us, the consecrated, should be relishing communion and should be facilitating communion, as we learn from the life of Father Francis Vineeth. Spirit liberates him or her from all enslaving bondages, brings in freedom to transcend everything, and at the same time, the power to love everything and everyone very dearly and affectionately, yet ever remaining free and in union with God and all fellow beings. The second route is a pilgrimage on the path of truth and peace, seeking with openness and humility. It was Pope Francis who had perceptively stated that every Christian, all the more so every consecrated person, must experience an exodus within oneself. Continuously making an exodus from yourselves in order to center your life on Christ and on His gospel, on the will of God, laying aside your own plans. It is an exodus from one's own ego to the needs of others, from self-centeredness to other-centeredness, and ultimately to God-centeredness. In this process, Father Francis insisted that as awareness deepens, our values change, and we become more and more liberated. Christian existence, following the paradigm of Jesus himself, should remain dynamic in letting oneself die to oneself, so that reaching out to others and giving themselves life in abundance becomes essentially constitutive. In fact, a Christian's identity shall be defined in terms of his or her ability to reach out to the other in need. Christian existence, seen from this perspective, is a constant becoming, the climax being every Christian becoming an alter Christus. The spiritual realization firmly grounded in his aspiration for communion with Jesus Christ, in whom he wished to be solidly anchored as his life progressed, made Father Francis Vineeth a pilgrim of truth and peace. As he himself had insightfully articulated it, a person given to prayer, meditation, and action is a wayfarer, a pilgrim. He or she journeys from the outer world to the inner forest, from his or her own external layers of awareness to the internal ones, and ultimately rests in that inexhaustible depth of his or her being where the divine dwells. In the passage, he or she experiences tranquility and joy from within, communes with the divine incessantly, and gets transformed into it. Although he was never perceived as a revolutionary who broke away from the established perspectives and patterns, his commitment to the ever unveiling truth, which he anchored in the person of Jesus Christ, made him an eternal pilgrim who was involved in a constant search and unending becoming process. As he wrote, holiness demands a becoming process, and in the Christian sense, a becoming of another Christ. If we look with this eye into the Upanishadic search for divine wisdom, it will make greater sense to us and pave the path of spiritual realization. As a person who was philosophically and theologically comfortable with the inner becoming process, as it was aimed at in his spiritual outlook and practices, Father Francis Vineeth was comfortable with the ongoing pilgrimage as well as the exodus in his own life. For example, the most conspicuous but tough exodus that he had undertaken was his decision to move out of his life at Dharmaram College and to found Vidya, a move which was perceived by many, known to him as an impossible turn, especially from the point of view of the struggles involved in the initial phase of construction and setting up of the campus for programs. Call it an exodus or pilgrimage. For Father Francis Vineeth, it was a leap of faith into the unknown, but totally relying on divine providence. He said, ashram was perhaps an expression of my searching desire. The underlying thought is not this, neti, neti. That is, not this way of life, not this academic excellence, but something different. Something not so definite, yet unfolding in the vagueness of an immaculate beauty, which I fell in love with, but unable to grasp and much less to embrace for many years. As he recalled it, ashram was an option to go away. Its first inspiration was not a destination, but a departure, which he says, not here, not here. For he believed that every fixed place is an attempted articulation of the inarticulate, which once too much solidified, I underline that, once too much solidified, may miss the mystery of the ineffable that ever reveals and ever conceals itself. Hence, the way out he had conceived was to remain a pilgrim forever. A concrete, solid ashram is not the final end of the search. The search will ever continue. All real articulations will have the limitations of effecticity, and we are always in a struggle to transcend this limitation. Though human soul is theoretically finite, it has an opening to the infinite and the ineffable, which is by nature infinite and everlasting. This is the inner core of the interior search which never ends. Hence, establishing the ashram is not the final end of the search. It should ever remain open, ever ready to leave the very ashram if God so wants. Even we know Father Francis Vineeth struggled to leave the ashram. This was a tough decision that he had finally to make. Beautifully and intelligently, in the following verse, he captured the inner dynamics of the search that he was involved in. There is nothing as beautiful as search, which has no end. Real search is always humble because the seeker is still on the path. No claim for final destiny, no disappointment either about not having reached the final goal. Ever moving forward, ever open to the vast expanse of the universe, and ever beyond the universe, where mysteries of that ineffable one will be unveiled one by one. Yet, ever remaining hidden in my searching mind in a world of unfinished wonder and utter silence. It was his conscious choice to keep the focus on the indefinite and the ineffable. He wanted to keep himself open towards the divine that to his mind continues to reveal as a never-ending process of avarana viksheba, a continuous aletheia. Two expressions, one from Sanskrit, the other from Greek, which were his favorite expressions. Hence, in the same line of thought, a reference to the way he looked at the whole process of spiritual search, a dynamic pilgrimage to the ineffable, may enlighten us. I skipped that verse. Having realized the centrality of eternal openness to the unfolding reality, Father Francis Vineeth prescribed this for practice for everyone, particularly the universal church. The universal church, according to him, for its growth and beauty, variety and vitality, needs such newness of expressions in every country where the good news is to be inculturated. As we are in 2025, it's quite promising as well as reassuring to note that Pope Leo XIV has stated just 2 days ago at the Vatican on the 26th of this month that we must all listen to one another. No one is excluded. We are all called to participate. No one possesses the whole truth. We may recall Aristotle and then later Aquinas. We must all humbly seek it and seek it together. How beautiful is the vision of looking at Christian life as an ongoing pilgrimage. It's interesting to see the apparent contradiction that his life was solidly anchored in the person of Jesus Christ on the one hand, and eternally open to the unfolding reality. For him, Jesus Christ was non-negotiable. But in spite of that non-negotiable foundation, he kept himself open forever. He had no qualms in subscribing to the definitive revelation of Jesus Christ received in history and appropriated by the church over a period of 2 millennia, and the scope for the same universe ultimate reality being approached in the form of an incessant process of revelation. Father Kurian would be happy about this process. For him, it had to do more with the dynamic reality of the ineffable and the human reality of contingency and limitation. He, I believe, understood the expression already but not yet quite well and incorporated it into the spiritual pilgrimage. It made him, to my mind, a better disciple of Jesus Christ, as he could keep himself open to varied forms of divine revelation made available in human history. He therefore remained open to all religions, all discourses. Now, closing the first part, I move on to the second part on the fruits. The first of the fruits, commitment to the little ones, listening to the cry of the poor. Jesus had a preferential option for the poor and the marginalized, as it could be easily made out from the Gospels. As his teachings reveal, compared to many others, the poor and the marginalized seem to be closer to the kingdom of heaven that he had unveiled as the final destiny of all human endeavors. The rootedness that Father Francis Vineeth had in the person of Jesus Christ and the experience of openness and continuous search made him a seeker of the kingdom of God and a person open to all, especially to the poor and the needy. Father Francis Vineeth was known among his colleagues and friends, and even among his students, as a compassionate person who would make himself available or make provisions for the needy. There are umpteen examples of such needy persons who in turn became his lifetime friends and companions. Their lives were touched by Father Francis Vineeth at a time when they were in need. There were instances of some of the scholastics from different congregations or dioceses who were his students, to whom he offered spiritual guidance as well as financial assistance at crucial moments. And some of them naturally also exploited his simplicity. There were a few families living in Bengaluru who were both spiritually and financially supported by him, and they became his lifetime friends and collaborators who extended their support when the ashram was founded. Father Francis Vineeth had a special inclination to support those who were weak and to reach out to them in need. This was quite visible in his approach to his friends and family circles. The vulnerable, be it in his family or among his friends, had a special place, a preferential place in his mind, and he reached out to them the best way possible. As it is stated in the Lexicate, the first apostolic exhortation of Pope Leo XIV, option for the poor is not necessarily to do so much for them in terms of sublime policies or huge projects, but to have them in their due place in our universe, within our horizons. I'm increasingly realizing the fact that over a period of time, the poor is not in our universe, they are not in our horizons. As we make our space more comfortable, more beautiful, the poor are slowly being pushed out without our notice. Indeed, those who have known Father Francis Vineeth personally would attest to the fact that he, even when he was engaged in his academic world, had openness as well as compassion towards the poor and the weak in his surroundings. I can talk about my own personal experience if time permits later. Yesterday, Peter Tyler repeatedly made reference to the Asia's poor being repeatedly mentioned when Father Francis Vineeth discussed about the Asian face of God. In fact, for him, the poor became part of the face of Jesus himself. Couldn't be separated. One of the favorite explanations of Father Francis Vineeth about the Vidyavanam Ashram Chapel is to look at the anthill model as symbolic Mount Tabor, where Jesus had revealed or unveiled himself before his three beloved disciples, Peter, Jacob, and John. Though depicted disproportionately in the whole depiction on top of the Vidyavanam Chapel, these three disciples are seen below the huge statue of Jesus, gazing with amazement and delight at Jesus on his heavenly glory. However, following the gospel paradigm, at the landing of the chapel, a healing scene of Jesus is also vividly depicted, which is reminiscent of the healing that Jesus had carried out as they climbed down from the mountain. Father Francis Vineeth had captured the approach or the mindset of Jesus, namely, his perspective of keeping within the horizon of heavenly glory the vulnerable and the sick, who are in need of preferential attention, especially for those who have had or even aspire to have a glimpse of the heavenly glories. Please make sure that you notice one without the other is impossible. If the latter does not follow, the former would remain suspect of its genuine value and heavenly grandeur. God is not a God exclusively of the glories removed from the poor and the needy, but the closest to them and having his preferential option for their well-being. Within the spiritual theology of Father Francis Vineeth, if the poor and the marginalized are not cared for, even the height of contemplation would be suspect of its genuine foundations in Christ consciousness. I hope some research students in Vinaya Sadhana would work on the spiritual theology of Father Francis Vineeth in the years to come. The second fruit, protecting and safeguarding creation. Father Francis Vineeth had a synthetic vision of creation, as a result of which he could see himself spontaneously forming part of nature. This vision emerged from his mystical orientation, cultivated through his insightful research and contemplative prayer. He valued the entire creation based on his conviction that the Lord of creation permeates the entire universe. His conviction is unambiguous. As Christ is the Word who became flesh, through whom everything was conceived and created, through my eye of Christian faith, I see the touch of Christ in all creation and the Spirit of Christ operating everywhere. The spiritual realization that he had attained, according to him, should not only be capable of liberating himself from the bondages of the ego, but also of positively transforming the world. A genuine search for depth, as it liberates one from one's own ego, will certainly express itself in selfless and liberating actions for the transformation of the whole world. The transformation he aims at in the world, which also includes our response to the whole creation, is multidimensional. He wrote, "A scientist may subordinate nature to his tastes and needs. A tabasa adapts his tastes and needs to the availability of nature. Of course, it's good and necessary to control nature. But if we do not know how to control ourselves, when nature fails, we will be nowhere." In a culture of absolute lack of moral self-control, we may not feel safe with police protection. This is the dangerous stage some cultures are now passing through. The value of tapas should once again strike us so that we may rediscover a world of deeper wealth and greater authenticity, leading to lasting peace. It's a quite long section, so just skip the next paragraph and move on to the next one. According to him, although many speak about eco-spirituality, rarely we get to experience it in our surroundings. He wrote, "In the modern world filled with carbon, cravings, and constructions, we hear a lot about eco-friendliness and eco-spirituality. We hardly see it anywhere in the industrial world of ours, except in the ashrams or similar places where sannyasins opt to live with less structural amassment and more nature-friendly atmosphere. Two major campuses where he lived, namely Dharmaram College and Vidya Ashram, abound in enviable green cover and natural habitat. In fact, the commitment of Father Francis Vineeth for the protection and preservation of nature could be vividly experienced in the way he conceived and nurtured Vidyavanam campus. When the land was bought, practically the whole place had hardly one or two small trees. Practically, it was a barren land filled with rocky ground. However, as he was bent on transforming the space into a real forest, he, with the involvement of many, initiated planting and nurturing trees all around the campus. And in a few years' time, the whole Vidyavanam campus literally became a forest, a vanam of Vidya. I'm happy to note that over the years, all those who succeeded him at the ashram, including Father Anto, Father Babu, Father Kalyat, Father Anil, so on and so forth, they also invested resources to ensure that the campus protects and nurtures its beautiful green cover with addition of new trees. I find a spelling mistake there, so I should correct it myself later. Seen from the larger horizons of the society, consistent with his spiritual outlook, the positive perspective he has cultivated about the creation comes out strongly in his response to globalization. In striking contrast to the globalization movement, where material things are made globally accessible, here it is a spirit within us which becomes more and more cosmic, enfolding all humanity and its universe in a joyful embrace of love and self-giving. How many minutes do we have, Father Thomas?
7 more minutes.
7. Thank you. His proactive response to the harm done to nature is seen in the conscious efforts he had made in initiating and nurturing a perfect green cover within Vidyavanam Ashram campus. This was his prophetic action. As it was an effort that spanned almost a quarter of a century, we can imagine the personal resolve and commitment that he had towards this sublime goal. Indeed, to my mind, this is also a testimony of his evolved spiritual outlook and enlightened Christian consciousness, which was all-inclusive and caring, and had the place for taking care of our home as well. It is also interesting to note that his prophetic approach in this regard is more action-oriented. Although there are a number of his writings that challenge the looming ecological crisis that humanity encounters, and a number of questions that are raised against the damaging human consciousness and life-threatening practices, his practical approach was oriented more towards definitive action in the form of an alternative practice and creating a natural habitat where all of us could realistically experience the scope for a new horizon. And finally, the third fruit, commitment for human solidarity and universal fraternity. As I came back to Bengaluru weather had some impact on my health. The new vision emerging from the mystical communion leads us to the experience of unity among the human beings as well as within the entire creation. When human beings, through their untiring search, learn to integrate the outer layers in their own innermost depth, where the ineffable abides, the entire universe becomes splendid with the light and delight of the ineffable. They all become one as Jesus, the visible face of the ineffable, prayed. May they be one. Just as you are in me, I am in you. This takes us to another plane of human existence where human fraternity would flourish. What we need in the world is an undivided humanity held together by the power of the Spirit, where all are free, loving, self-giving, and caring for one another. Backed up by his theological vision and spiritual perspective, it was easy for Father Francis Vineeth to conceive of moving from I to we, thus making it possible for a fundamentally Christian dialogical vision and conversion. And I'm afraid in India, both our political structures and our religious structures are now acting against this frame of Christian consciousness. Thank you. This led to the emergence of a vision of solidarity among the human beings. And as Father Francis put it, God is the loving Father and the benevolent King, and all his children live in harmony and unity of heart, not exploiting the wealth of the Father at the expense of the other children, not only of this generation, but also the generations to come. Indeed, the harmony and communion aimed at are essential ingredients of being Christian. It is again constitutive of Christian identity, Christian consciousness. For being the Church of Jesus Christ is to exist in communion. Further, being ecclesial is to be necessarily dialogical. And over a period of time, though Second Vatican Council had already opened up the avenues for dialogue with different religions and different ways of living, unfortunately, over the last, let's say, 1 or 2 decades, it has slowly died out, and even in Dharmaram, which is so unfortunate. The strong anchoring of Father Francis Vineeth's life in the person of Jesus Christ, seen from a truly Christian perspective, made him a true seeker who was engaged in an ongoing but open search for truth. His noble effort was to explore the ultimate reality, the ineffable, in its constant avarana viksheba, making it truly inexhaustible. Moving to the last paragraph, true religion being in the realm of the Spirit, Father Francis Vineeth ardently believed that efforts for communion that goes beyond the narrow boundaries of religious affiliations will open up new vistas of human solidarity and fraternity. In all these endeavors, the effort of Father Francis Vineeth and his colleagues was aiming at and cultivating in a new spiritual culture that would take us far beyond the conditioning of the divine material world. He was convinced that matter has an inherent tendency to divide, whereas the spirit has by nature a tendency to unite. While remaining a Christian pilgrim with openness to the ineffable, being revealed through different religions and systems of thought, he had the prophetic courage to stand firm in the Catholic, universal, and inclusive vision that the Church had bequeathed from the Gospel and reiterated by the teachings of Second Vatican Council, both of which propelled Father Francis Vineeth to celebrate them in and through his life and ministry. And to conclude, a pilgrim is a person who, having identified someone or something holy, gets involved in a journey towards the holy, and at the end of the process attains a spiritual darshan and or aspersion of the Holy of Holies, culminating in an appropriation of the holy and the consequent inner transformation, metanoia, of his or her own life. A prophet, understood in a religious context, on the other hand, having been convinced of the values or principles associated with the holy, stands firm in challenging oneself as well as others to transform their lives in tune with the perception of the holy and align themselves with the Holy of Holies. As for Father Francis Vineeth, the ultimate focus in life was summarily captured in a little verse that he coined in Sanskrit with his characteristic gospel foundation. Pita tavachit bhavana tada mamahrit sadhana. Hopefully, we would ask Father Anto Amarnath to chant this for us. And unfortunately, the reference I've given is wrong. It's not from his writings, but from my introductory article on Father Francis Vineeth, Towards New Horizons of Indian Christian Living. So it's not from In Search, but from the article. So page 84 is indicative of that. This prayer was his inner motivation as well as his ultimate goal that shaped his life, pilgrimage, and prophetic mission. Both of them then are found to be primarily orienting themselves towards inner transformation of their own lives and in turn the lives of others. Compared to a pilgrim, however, a prophet in general perceived as to stand firm in direct challenge, in directly challenging others with courage and determination, so that the expected outcome, namely the transformation on a large scale, is definitively attained. You could read the next paragraph. Let me go to the last one. Summing up his life, Father Francis Vineeth concluded his article in search of the ineffable. Yet the little flame of hope burning in my heart still tells me, one day you will come to me. Read my poems, sing my melodies, and take me to your Majesty's garden place. Until that day, lighting all the flames of my little lamp, I will wait for you, singing, the heavens magnify the Lord, my soul too magnifies the Lord my God. Thus, at the end of this personal pilgrimage that I made through the life and thought of Father Francis Vineeth, I hope you all would agree with me. The structure I have introduced to review and assess his life and thought with perspectives emerging